You'd be hard-pressed to find a Star Wars fan who's adjudged EA's time with the franchise to have been a positive one. But slowly, underneath the surface, many have begun to reappraise one of the publisher's few Star Wars titles, 2017's controversial Battlefront II. The game, developed by DICE with assistance from EA Motive, was pronounced dead on arrival when it released that November, gripped in a furore surrounding the game's progression system, which was randomized, grind-heavy, and predicated almost entirely around, cue spooky music, microtransactions. Ooh. While those criticisms were certainly warranted at the time, a new story has developed in the ensuing months, one that paints a decidedly different picture of DICE's sequel than many may be aware of. Yes, EA is still the corporate embodiment of Gary Oldman's Dracula, Bugman from Men in Black, and the Candyman rolled into one, but hear me out, everyone. It took plenty of time, but with the implementation of regular updates, a complete rework of their old progression system, and several new content drops, Battlefront 2 is finally winning over fans, to the point that many, myself included, have begun to sit up and take notice. So, I'm Ewan from WhatCulture, and here are 10 reasons you're wrong about Star Wars Battlefront 2. Number 10, the Loopbox Controversy is so last year. Undoubtedly, one of the biggest issues facing DICE's sequel is the fact that, even though they've managed to change the game's fortunes around, general perception from the public is still informed by that initial controversy from November 2017. Just before the game launched. Although microtransactions have returned to Battlefront 2, multiplayer is by no means play to win. They can only be used to acquire cosmetics, and progression has been completely revamped, rewarding players for investing time in a given class, as opposed to the random frustration induced by periodic loot box drops. No one should be patting EA on the back for backing down on an obviously dreadful idea, but equally, players should be aware of the fact that Battlefront 2 has changed. Number 9, every update has been free, just like DICE promised. The first entry in DICE's Battlefront series released in 2015 to a relatively lukewarm reception, and for good cause. Gameplay itself was compelling, and the studio's attention to detail was equally immaculate, but there was a pretty clear issue too, that being the complete lack of content on offer. The game shipped with a paltry selection of maps and game modes and lacked a single-player mode entirely. Despite this, the original Battlefront reboot retailed for a whopping 50 quid. That's 15 hairsprays if you're Josh Brown, and players who wanted to expand the experience were forced to fork out an additional 40 quid for the season pass, which is a big flirkin' frying pan if your name's Adam Cleary. It was a shocking amount, and it only had the effect of segregating the player base, thus decreasing the quality of matches and leading to the inevitable moment all DLC became heavily discounted in the following year. Fortunately, DICE and EA learned from this mistake and promised that Battlefront 2 would release without any season pass, and that all post-launch content would be free and available to all those who owned a copy of the game. And it has been. Updates were initially delayed as a result of complaints with the progression system, but ever since, additional content has been regular and easily accessible. Number 8, there's real engagement with the community. One of the biggest issues facing multiplayer shooters in this day and age is whether or not they have the ability to retain their player base. First-person shooters in particular often suffer from a massive decline in users after the first month or so, with the only notable exception in the last couple of years being Rainbow Six Siege. As a result, studios endeavor more than ever to engage with their community. First, to ensure that people remain interested, and second, to encourage a greater level of interest in their product. Responding to feedback and constantly implementing tweaks and updates is a great way of doing this, and it's a simple truth that DICE have retained a constant dialogue with their community throughout Battlefront 2's most important periods of transition. The original plan was to release additional content closer towards the beginning of 2018, but the decision to refocus the studio's efforts on implementing a new progression system forced a delay. Number 7, fans asked for the Clone Wars, and they got it. Although the prequels tend to get a bit of a bad rap among Star Wars fans, there's actually quite a lot of love out there for the era as a whole. even the films. Fans can debate the quality of George Lucas's prelude to the original trilogy all day long, boss-nass cheeks and all, but there has been an effort since the beginning of the decade to flesh out that era. Dave Filoni's Clone Wars TV show is a particularly brilliant example, and with a new season on the horizon, it's fair to say that fans haven't forgotten about the prequels, even as a new trilogy nears its own conclusion. Also, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan is like the best, so there's that too. True to form, DICE were aware of the resurgent interest in the Clone Wars and duly responded, beginning with the introduction of unique clone trooper armor in August, the addition of General Grievous in October, Obi-Wan Kenobi in November, and a brand new Geonosis map that same month too. All are voiced by the actors who portrayed the characters in the Clone Wars TV show as well, so that's a neat little bonus in itself. Number 6, the attention to detail is still stunning. While it's become a recurring trend to poke fun at the unconventional ways EA have announced their previous Star Wars projects, upon reflection, it was perhaps apt that DICE's introduction to a galaxy far, far away was illustrated by them getting to grips with costumes and props from the films. Even in the original Battlefront, it was clear that DICE had created the most detailed Star Wars game of all time, but that detail is even more apparent in the sequel. Props are rendered in immaculate detail, while character models and costumes are pretty much mirror images of their cinematic selves. It never gets old, and seeing these characters on the actual battlefield in first or third person always makes for a treat, even if you are being force-choked by Darth Vader in a match-losing moment, which, you know, some people may find pleasant. Who are we to judge? Number 5, there's an actual progression system now. Let's be clear. Battlefront 2's initial progression system wasn't fun and was designed with microtransactions in mind. An argument could be made that its random nature helped encourage players to pick up a variety of different classes and thus make the squad-based gameplay much more enjoyable, but that just wasn't the case. Since March of last year, Battlefront 2 has boasted a much more traditional progression system than was originally the case. Now, the more time you put into a given class, the more you get out of it. Skill points unlock and upgrade star cards, while unlocks are based on leveling up with a given class, which requires players to earn XP as their chosen character. The same applies to heroes, villains, starfighters, vehicle classes, and special soldier classes, and it means the Battlefront of today doesn't just offer a more compelling short-term fix, but a long-term one too. Number 4, it captures the scale of the films perfectly. Say what you will about wanting single-player Star Wars titles or what have you, but there's no denying that there's plenty of space for a Star Wars game of Battlefront's ilk to exist. Currently, Battlefront 2 does what no other kind of Star Wars game can offer, and that is the immersion of a player in big, ridiculous, authentically replicated scenes from the films. All of the little details mentioned earlier help create that feeling, but there's also a lot that must be said regarding level design and the way maps develop over the course of a given match. Whether you're barreling through the internal structure of a Star Destroyer in an X-Wing or leading an all-out charge to stop the First Order from unleashing the might of Starkiller Base, there's scarcely a match in Battlefront 2 that won't make you feel as though you're living the movies through and through, and that is something truly special. Number 3, the single player contributes something genuinely interesting. Although criticised at the time for sporting a somewhat predictable plot with a cookie-cutter twist, it's easy to forget what Battlefront 2's story did well, namely with the character of Iden Versio. Battlefront 2 had a pretty big task on its hands in choosing to detail the gap between episodes 6 and 7, something that had only been attempted in a few novels and comics up until that point. Point being, this was the first time audiences would see that era in motion, and in detailing what happened immediately after the Empire's collapse, the game's story truly shines. Call it cliche, predictable, or whatever, but seeing Inferno Squad transition from a ruthless tool of the Empire into a unit with conscience and belief was genuinely gratifying to see play out. And by the time Iden and Del were participating in the Battle of Jakku, Battlefront had more than justified the couple's switch of allegiance. Number 2, the actual gameplay is really enjoyable. Battlefront 2 won't be making its way onto the competitive circuit anytime soon, but that doesn't make it any less compelling. Yes, it may still have the same problem of players sitting at the back of the map with a sniper and not playing the goddamn objective, but when it gels together, it is so much fun. Plus, with the addition of squad-based gameplay, Battlefront has finally made it easier for players to interact with their cohorts, coordinating little moments of genius to influence the cacophony of large-scale engagements. Number 1, it's not over yet. In case you haven't noticed, there's a new Star Wars film coming out this December. Given the releases of Battlefront and its sequel, it would probably be wise, then, to assume that a third entry in the series will arrive around the same time, right? Well, maybe not. The next Star Wars game on the horizon is Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order, which is set to release in winter 2019. As for Battlefront, neither EA nor DICE have indicated when a third game could arrive, and given how the first sequel's roadmap was delayed by major changes to the progression system, it would be wise to assume that Battlefront 2 has plenty more fuel left in the tank. Anakin Skywalker is set to come in February, with additional game modes to come shortly after, but more content is rumored to arrive later in the year as well. Either way, this could be the beginning of something new for DICE's much maligned shooter. It wasn't without its issues, but with enough TLC, Battlefront 2 has managed to turn its fortunes around and become something pretty enjoyable. If you love Star Wars, it's well worth another go.